The end of the year is right around the corner, and it's usually around this time that I like to make a video looking back at the previous year and talk about all the accomplishments and all the changes that happened out here on the ranch. And as I look back, there's a lot of things to talk about this year. That's what's going on today on Farmer Tyler Ranch. Going back to January of 2023, I think the big thing that I remember for that month was water. Oh my gosh, we had more rain out here than I think we've had in years. This was truly something that we needed after years of drought out here in Northern California, but to get all that water at once really ended up creating a lot of problems for me as well. And because the weather in January was so nasty day after day, it was a good time to take advantage of that and do some shop projects. So I started a project that a lot of you guys have been asking about, and one that will be coming back soon, and that is fixing up the Jubilee. So what you're seeing here is about as far as I got with the tractor teardown. Actually, teardown was pretty successful. We just didn't really get anything put back together yet. And I do have full intentions of finishing this project. It's gonna take time. This is the kind of thing that I can really only afford to work on when I don't have anything else more pressing going on, and that doesn't happen very often. So for all of you that have been asking about the Jubilee, it is in the same state that it was in the last time you saw it, and I am gonna finish it. Don't worry. By the time we got into February, I still had my weaned calves here on the ranch. I wasn't able to sell them yet, and that's a little abnormal for me. Usually I sell these guys at the first sale that they have in January because I don't want to keep feeding them hay. But as it worked out this year, the sale barn was closed for a couple of sales because the storms were so bad down there that they lost power. And for the times that they were open, the roads that I would have had to take to get there were flooded. But finally, by February, things calmed down enough and kind of got back to normal, enough to where we could get these calves moved down to the sale. Moving on to March, the two big things that stood out in that month was the beginning of calving season, and I'm pointing to these guys because these are the calves that were actually being born in March of this year. All in all, this calving season was fairly uneventful. There were a few little hiccups or a few little issues that needed to be addressed, but for the most part, things went pretty smoothly. In fact, unless I'm forgetting somebody, every cow that we had bred did have a calf, but we had a stillborn, we had one that died after it was a few days old, and it seems like there was another one that we lost, and now I can't remember how. With everything all said and done, our calf crop percent this year was 92%, which, I mean, anything over 90 I'm pretty happy with. Obviously, we want that number to be as high as possible. And if you don't know what I'm talking about when I say a calf crop percent, that would be the number of calves that you wean compared to the number of cows that were with the bull. So like in our case, we had 36 cows that were bred. We're weaning 33 calves. It's like 91.6%. So we're gonna call it 92. And the other big thing that happened in March of this year is we took delivery of our registered Sim Angus bull. You guys know him as Rivet. Rivet is half Black Angus, 3/8 Simmental, and 1/8 Charolais, which is where he gets his unique coloring from. And we got him from our friend Jeremy up at Split Creek Angus. As it turns out, Rivet has got a ton of personality, and he's been a lot of fun to watch out here this year. And I'm very excited to see what his calves look like in this coming spring. As we moved on into April, the ground was finally getting dry enough to start doing some stuff, and one of the first jobs that I did in the corral this year, among many, which we'll get into later, was building some concrete approach and departure ramps for the squeeze chute. The whole purpose of these ramps is because I knew that I would be installing scale load bars to the chute, which is going to lift it up another 3 inches or so. And I didn't want the cattle to have to make such a big step to get up onto the chute. So that's why we got the ramps. But before I could get the load bars installed, I knew that there was a little bit of welding I wanted to do on the chute, and that was to install these rear like blocking plates, or I don't really know what to call these, but the factory ones that come on this chute are made out of sheet metal, and they were breaking off, or I think one side did break off completely. After the welding on this project was done, it was then safe to install the load bars, so that's what happened next. I put a set of heavy-duty Gallagher load bars on this scale, and I'm running it off of the Gallagher W1 scale head. This has been really a dream come true for me. I've always wanted a scale on this squeeze chute, and I just never really thought that I would be able to do it, and this year it happened. It's really cool to be able to track data and sort of pick out your best performing animals, but it's also really useful if you're ever having to administer antibiotics, or if there's a vaccine that you're giving based on animal weight. You can get a perfectly accurate weight before you give them those things. And I mean, that is really the right way to do it. The next piece of information that the scale is going to give me that I'm very excited to get is when I bring the harvest steers home, I would really like to see what their performance numbers are being just on grass and hay. This is going to be very valuable information for me moving forward, because it will help me better be able to predict harvest dates for them, or how long they're going to have to be in a given pasture before they're ready to go. So this is an awesome tool, very huge upgrade to my setup. I think I feel like I don't talk about this enough, or how excited I am to have it, but there it is. And because the ground was dry enough to start doing some work in the corral, it was also dry enough and warm enough to start rotationally grazing for the year, and that did also happen in April. And now moving on to May, where the big event was getting my hay field cut and baled. Now, if you remember in the beginning of this video, I talked about how much rain we got this winter, and that actually really ended up hurting my hay crop this year. This is kind of strange, because usually the way that my hay yield is affected is that I'm not getting enough rain, and it's not enough for the hay to grow, get tall, and have a good yield. This year, it was like the exact opposite problem. We got too much rain, and I think what ended up happening is that it just drowned a bunch of the seed out. Things are getting pretty intense around here. So the hay yield was terrible. There's really no other way to say it, but that doesn't mean that there weren't some positive things about haying this year. The first one being that I didn't really have any mechanical issues, which is always a positive thing. And not only did I not have issues, but I also think that I discovered the technique that my baler requires to effectively start a bale reliably, and that is something that I've struggled with that baler pretty much since I've had it. And it was because of comments left by you guys that I was sort of able to figure this out. Or, you know, I don't even know if I'll say that I figured it out, but it was something that one of you suggested I try, and it ended up working. I'm looking over my notes here, and yes, I actually made notes for this video. Usually I shoot from the hip, but there's so much stuff to cover here, I wanted to make sure that I got it all. But it looks like June was probably the most eventful month of the year for me. And that started with the birth of what I refer to as our surprise calf from the year, and that is the calf that was born out of heifer 2210. What ended up happening is that one of our heifers that was set to be bred for the first time this year actually had a calf. Now, how might that happen, you might be asking? Well, I figured she had to get bred at around 7 to 8 months of age. And the only way that I can really see that this would have, you know, been feasible is that our black bull here, number one, little boy, was a calf as well. He's the same age as she is, and I think that he must have got her. I suppose that it's possible one of the herd bulls could have got her too, but man, she would have just been so little. It seems a lot more likely that little boy is the culprit. Now, hopefully it's obvious that we don't want heifers getting bred that young, and that's why I took some extra precautions this year to make sure that that didn't happen again. But all things considered, this really went pretty well. She delivered the calf on her own. She raised the calf on her own. I did lock them up for a couple of days just to make sure that they would mother up. But really, it was a very hands-off event for me, and they did everything just the way that they were supposed to. The calf is probably a month and a half younger than the rest of the calves in this group. So obviously, it's going to be smaller anyway because of that. But if you look at it, it is significantly smaller. I don't think I've actually maybe I have weighed it. I'll have to go back and check. But it's I think around half the size of the other calves in this group. Part of that is because it is a little bit younger, but more so that's because, you know, this heifer is just not making as much milk as she would normally make when she's a little bit older. So this calf's been kind of getting shortchanged in that department. And well, the results speak for themselves. Normally in years past, bull turnout date for me is the first week in June, say June 1st, June 2nd, somewhere in there. This year, however, I decided to hold these boys out a little bit longer to push our calving season out just a little bit, 2 weeks. And in the attempts to sort of match what the environment is giving us to what our cattle are doing. And what I mean by that is I just want the weather to be a little bit nicer. I want the ground to be drier. I want the grass to be a little bit taller before these girls start having calves. I might even push them out another 2 weeks this year and have our calving date moved out to the beginning of April, just because I think that these conditions will match up a little bit better, but we'll see how things go this year. This was a big year for bull turnout though, because this would be the first year that I was using exclusively bulls that I now own. In the past, I had always rented bulls from a friend of mine, but this year, we're relying on these two guys. Rivet, I was really not worried about just because I bought him from a reputable breeder. He'd been tested, all of the things, so I was pretty sure that he would be fine and be able to do the job. Little boy, on the other hand, we raised him up from a calf, and I never did do a breeding soundness exam on him, which I probably should have, but because I knew Rivet was ready to go, I didn't really feel that it was as important. This was also the first year that I had used 2 inexperienced bulls, and if you guys remember, I was a little bit nervous about that. Just because in the past I've always had an experienced bull that you kind of knew would get the job done if all else failed. This year, like I say, we were relying on these two guys, and within minutes after turning them out with the cow herd, they showed me that they knew what to do. And while I did see Little Boy take his fair share of rides on these cows, I suspect that the majority of this coming calf crop is going to be out of Rivet, because it was like every time I looked out in the pasture, I just see Rivet's head up above everyone else, and you know what he's doing. June was also the month that I put out my Fussel Farms Cow Sprayer. I've got it folded up right now, so it doesn't really look like what it's supposed to look like, but basically what this is it's like a doorway that they walk through, and when they do, they hit these trip arms, which trigger these spray nozzles that spray them down with fly spray. I found this to be very effective on my operation for reducing the amount of flies that were on the cows, and I just never got tired of every time the entire herd would walk through this thing, you could go over to it and look on the ground and just see thousands of dead flies. So you know that it works. I tried everything from a permethrin mix to just dish soap and water, and I got good results with everything. The last big thing in June was bringing these pigs home. We brought 10 originally. 2 have already gone, and these 8 are getting pretty close. So we move into July. The name of the game was hay hauling. I can fit 15 bales on my trailer, which means that this ended up taking me, it was probably like 21 or 22 trips, because I know a couple trips I was a little bit light, but we got them in the barn, we got them all moved over here, and the 8N stacked every single one. As August came around, 2 things were becoming very apparent to me. The first one was that I had not even started on my big corral project for the year, which was to replace this fence. As you can see, it's been done. And the other one was that I have a major smut grass problem in my pasture. So it was about that time that I got this fence torn down, and I was doing a lot of mowing out here on the pasture. And while I was mowing, I was thinking about a better way to deal with the smut grass, and that kind of leads me into what one of my goals will be for the following year that I'm not really talking about in this video, but I am talking about it right now. And that is to build a weed wiper for the pasture to deal with the smut grass. If you don't know what smut grass is, count yourself lucky. But what it is it's some really kind of like spiny grass that the cattle just do not like to eat, and it will really start taking over because the cattle will eat everything but smut grass, and that allows it to spread. So it's becoming a real problem out here, and it's something that's got to be dealt with. Getting the old fence torn down that used to be here was was actually quite easy because it was halfway fallen down already. And getting it torn down, I guess, is not the significant part. The significant part is that once it's down, you don't have any fence here at all. So the pressure is on to get the new one built. And in between mowing pasture and tearing this fence down, I brought home my new to me 1974 Dodge D300. The plan is to get this old girl spruced up to where it's somewhat reliable and use it to move round bales. I figure I can get 10 on the bed of this truck and then pull the trailer with it as well, making each load a total of 25 bales, and that'll save me a lot of trips, which should be nice. But first, it definitely needs a little love and care. This is one of those things where you feel like you got a lot of time to do it, but you know, it's gonna be time to haul hay before we know it. As we rolled into September, the pressure was on, like I say, to get this fence done, and that's exactly what happened. This ended up taking a long time because I cut and notched every one of these joints, and that it just takes time. There's no getting around it. What some people will do is they'll pinch the ends of the pipe so that they butt straight against the post, and you save some time welding it that way, but you need a pipe smasher, for lack of a better term. If you were to try to smash all these with a sledgehammer, you'd be out here longer doing that than you would be cutting notches. So rather than go buy yet another tool, I decided to notch all of these, and I think it makes a stronger joint anyway. So it was a lot of work, but I'm very happy with how this fence turned out. Once the fence was finished, I had some leftover pieces of pipe because I'm trying to make a habit of buying extra material when I do a job like this, because always better to have more than you need than not enough. And because I had some of that extra material, it sort of opened the floodgates for what would become a bunch of corral projects. And the first one was this little short section of fence here. I knew that eventually I wanted all pipe on this alleyway, and also that I wanted a gate here, which is what I've got. And the cross brace, this is all kind of looking forward to the future of knowing what this will eventually become. And we're just kind of going step by step every year getting it done. And once I had this side of the alleyway looking pretty good, it made the other side look all that much more terrible. So I ended up pulling a bunch of these boards down, putting some new ones up, and making almost like a solid wall over here was kind of the intention. And while doing that, I also added a board. I don't know if this fence has settled a little bit over the years or what happened, but it seemed awfully short. And if you guys remember when I was loading coal cows out, they kept putting their chins up over this top board and looking over it like they wanted to jump, and that really made me nervous. And I got to thinking, you know, every time I load cows, I don't want to be nervous. So I'm going to add another board to the top here to hopefully prevent that from happening. Rather than replace this next year, which was the original plan, this might stand for a few years because I think it's going to be perfectly functional, and I think that it will still work good for several more years to come. With this section of the alleyway done, the main weak link in the corral was this gate, or lack thereof. There actually didn't used to be a proper gate here. It was always just a panel that I would tie up, and I had multiple times over the years where calves ducked underneath, cows jumped over. It just was not a good setup, and I'm very excited to try this out now. I think this is going to work a lot better. And while I was in corral fixing mode, I added some reinforcements to the loading alley here, and this will probably be the project that I do next year. I've been wanting to replace this loading alley for a while, and I think that next year is probably going to be the time, because while I have made as many Band-Aid patches to this as possible, it still is just, the strength is a bit questionable, and there's some little minor changes that I would like to make to it. So this is probably going to be the project for 24, but with the little improvements that I did make to it this year, I think it's going to make, like, shipping cows to the winter pasture, taking calves to the auction, all of those jobs are going to go 10 times smoother, my prediction, with these little upgrades. By October, rice harvest around me had pretty much concluded, and when the guys finish cutting the rice in these fields, there's a bunch of straw that's left behind, and usually what they end up doing is flooding the fields and then stomping that straw into the ground to help it decompose. That's why we have so many geese around here, and that's why you see these big fields of water in the background during this time of year. This year, before my neighbor got his fields flooded and his rice straw stomped, I asked him if I could bale up some of that straw to use it as bedding in my cow corral, and he was okay with it, so that's what we did. This ended up being a very valuable lesson for me, and what I learned is that the cattle really like to eat that rice straw, especially when they've still got some grass out in the pasture. And I think that next year I would like to try to bale up a lot more of the rice straw than I did this year, because I now see how useful it can be for me. The original plan was just to stack these bales up on the mound here in the corral in hopes that the cattle would stomp them down and really reduce the mud out here. That was the main purpose of doing this. But what I found is that the cattle ended up eating a lot of these bales. And now that I look back on it, I think this kind of saved me, because I was a little bit short on hay this year. I think I was about 10 bales short of what I usually get. Sorry, buddies come over to say hello while I'm talking. So if you notice me sort of looking down or like I'm preoccupied with something, it's because he's wanting to get a scratch. Even with what they ate, you can see that they left a lot behind, although I was hoping they would actually leave a little bit more behind than what they did. So I think next year I want to try to bale like maybe twice as much as I put out here this year, maybe more. And then I think that we'll try this again. I think that I'm still going to see some good results as far as mud reduction with what's left here, but I think that it probably should be a little bit more. The highlight of November, I believe, was getting the calves weaned. That's always a big milestone to cross every year, to reach every year. What would be the right way to say that? You know what I'm saying. And maybe the more exciting thing about this was not just getting the calves weaned, but being able to test out my new fence here, because when the calves are weaned, this fence is the only thing that separates them from their mothers. I did catch one calf reaching his head through the bars and nursing on his mother, but only one, and no one has broke through it. And that was really the big concern, because in years past when I had this really shabby fence here, that was always a problem. In fact, I would usually put a hot wire up here to separate them, or just keep the calves locked in the little corral for a few days to kind of let the weaning process happen. I much prefer doing it this way though. It's less stressful for both calves and cows if they can still like touch noses through the fence and see each other, sniff each other, all that stuff that they like to do. So this was a huge improvement. November was also the month that we brought home our new member of the family, and that is, of course, this little girl right here. This is our German Shepherd puppy Belly. The way that we got her, I guess, was sort of unusual. Some friends of ours found her and another puppy in their orchard while they were harvesting walnuts, and we decided to take her. We assume she's a German Shepherd just by looking at her, but really, there's a lot we don't know about her. We don't know where she came from, and we don't really know what she is. I think if she was crossed with something else, it would be fairly obvious by now. And to me, she looks like a German Shepherd. And of course, the last thing that I need to talk about that happened in November, although I didn't really get to film it as well as I usually do, is planting the hayfield. There's a little over 35 acres here. I've got this split into two fields. 20 acres is triticale, and 15 of it is a three-way forage mix made up of beardless wheat, beardless barley, and oats. Planting the hay this year was mostly uneventful, but I was racing to try to beat a storm that never ended up happening, and as a result, this hay's been really slow to get started. But as you can see now, it has gotten rained on one good time since planting it, and it's starting to look better, and we're actually starting to get a little sprinkle right now. Storm's coming in tonight, and it ought to do this field a lot of good. And that pretty much brings us up to date. It has been an eventful year, as it seems to always be. But be that as it may, I look back at the goals that I had set for this year, and I didn't hardly accomplish any of them, but I'll be talking about that in another video. Thanks for hanging out with me today, guys, and I hope I'll see you again on Farmer Tyler Ranch.